Well, welcome everybody to today's webinar. Thank you everybody for joining me. My name's Dr. Damien Hatton and I'll be your host today for this introduction to IMM webinar. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. You're all on mute. We're using Zoom, which many of you I'm sure will be familiar with, not least since we've all been working at home for some time now. So you're all on mute. I'm just sharing my video, probably only just for the first few minutes. We've got a bit of an international audience with us today. So a lot of people will be logging in from London as part of the Sport Unites program. But we've also got an international audience of people joining us. So depending on the sort of different connectivity levels, I'll be turning the video off just to give us a bit more bandwidth. So, yeah, we'll be getting started in a moment, and I'll do a proper introduction to myself, but we've got three little devices for you to utilize. We've got the Q&A box, which I'll be using, and you'll have spotted hopefully on your panel. We'll be using that for the exercises. We've also got a chat box. So I've got my colleague Kelly on the line today. If you've got any technical issues, there's not a huge amount we can do once we get underway, but if you do have any problems with your audio or your video, if you want to use the chat box, and we may be able to help you with any sort of troubleshooting questions via the chat box. But the Q&A box and also the hand up, the raise hand feature, we can use during the exercises. So if you want to come in during one or two of the exercises just to speak, it's always good to break up my voice with other people's voice on a webinar. Just raise your hand. Otherwise, just type into the Q&A box your responses, and I'll be using our virtual corkboard to bring and whiteboard to bring some of the responses during the exercise together. There's no obligation to participate in those exercises. So if you want to, that's great. If not, that's no problem at all. So many of you will already have done the introduction course and started that. Some may not have. So what I will be doing during this exercise is recapping a bit on the IMM course and try to take an account of the fact that some people may have got involved with the e-learning already. Others may just be logging in and starting on doing that. But I'll run through the agenda for today in a moment. And one other housekeeping matter. Yeah, it was really just in relation to some of those individuals who are logging today who may have been on our previous webinars and our previous incarnation, if you like, of this M&E training. We have circulated an FAQ sheet with regards to how the two courses compare, because we are aware that there's going to be some duplication as you transition onto this course. So for those of you who have taken the previous webinars, we did think this introduction would be useful as we are introducing some new terminology. And also we'll be running through how the learning actually works. So we thought it'd be useful for you to also join this introduction. But that FAQ sheet on how the two courses compare and which bits, maybe duplication that you can skip over has been also circulated. But if you don't have a copy of that, we can send it through at the end of today's webinar. Okay, well, I think that's about all the housekeeping stuff. I'm hoping you're all seeing my screen just at the moment, and I'll just do a proper introduction of myself. So we're using a tool called Prezi. Many of you who've been on our sort of presentations previously will be familiar with this. My name is Damien Hatton. I'm the Managing Director at InFocus Consulting. And my previous incarnation was actually as a medical doctor, doctor of infectious diseases and tropical medicine in London. And I was about 20 years ago now, set up a sport for development initiative called Street League in London, whilst I was a doctor working in the A&E department there. And that was sort of my first step into social entrepreneurship and social enterprise, and also my first dabblings and touchings with M&E and monitoring and evaluation, and trying to understand and grapple with why it's important as a topic. And certainly when I reflect on Street League's journey over this period, I recognize that it's played a very important role in both its sustainability 20 years on and its growth, its rollout across the country into many cities across the UK. But about 10, 15 years ago, myself and my colleague Tom, who is our head of training, who isn't on today's call, but you will certainly be running into Tom in many of the additional webinar trainings, we set up and co-founded In Focus, really to take some of those lessons, practical lessons learned forward and share them with others, but focusing in around this topic of impact measurement and management. And since you'll be seeing a fair amount of me over the course of the e-learning course, you'll already have seen, for those who have logged in, that I do pop up on various videos. So a bit of personal stuff. I do like a spot of mountaineering, not that we're getting much at the moment with the lockdown. So what are we going to do and cover on today's webinar? And what I'm going to do is just avoid distracting me in the corner. I'm just going to switch off the video and reduce the bandwidth a little. So in terms of today's webinar, what are we going to cover? I'm going to give an overview to the impact measurement and management training, first of all, just so that you're aware of how that works, what's involved, and how to kind of get the most out of the training that's being provided. We'll do an exercise, first of all, on the challenges with impact measurement and management. Some of you may have done this exercise previously. As I said, there's a little bit of overlap here between previous courses, but we thought we'd just ground everybody during this webinar on some new terminology and some common ways of thinking about what are, why we're doing monitoring and evaluation, or impact measurement and management as the term that we're introducing. We'll recap the topics from the introduction to IMM e-learning course, and we'll run through some of the benefits of IMM, so that we're all really clear on, really what are the motivations, and how do we kind of get others involved in the monitoring and evaluation of our programs, and really support the efforts more widely. And then there'll be opportunities really for Q&A as we go through the training throughout the webinar. In fact, if you've got a question, I'm going to try and keep an eye on the Q&A box and the participant box. And what I'll do is, if you've got a question, just stick up your hand or drop it into the Q&A box, as I said. So I'm just opening those up right now. So what are the impact measurement and management e-learning courses? So hopefully you've all been given your various logins by now, and you've managed to log into the site. So we have 3 e-learning courses, and an e-learning course is basically a combination of multimedia and different ways of accessing kind of the learning. So we've got videos, articles, exercises, and case studies. And future courses will be introducing the forums as well. So there'll be use of online forums and discussion forums to exchange information and knowledge. And those are combined with webinars such as today's, which are generally in the format of 90 minutes, to hear from one of the course tutors about the particular topic of interest and focus. And it's also an opportunity to engage with others. So today's going to be a bit of an information sharing exercise. We're going to do some interaction and some workshop type exercises, but the future ones, certainly the foundation and builder webinars, will all be quite interactive and Q&A based. So In fact, what I'm going to do just now, just to quickly make sure that everybody's clear, I'm going to jump out of the Prezi for a moment and just go to the website just to make sure everybody's clear on where to go and how to log in. So here we've got our website. If you've logged in, this is the first screen that you will come to, the Impact Measurement and Management e-learning platform. And if you scroll down the page, you'll come to the 3 courses in question. You'll see that we've got 2 of them have got a coming soon button on them. That's because the foundation will be available to you tomorrow. So for those of you who are itching to get going on the foundation course, but at the moment we've got the introduction to IMM. And once you're logged in, you can access by clicking various places, but if we click on the access to e-learning, it'll take you through to the course content itself. The panel to the left-hand side of the screen will allow you to navigate to different areas of functionality. But the core course is on this page, and you really press the continue or start now button, and it'll take you systematically through the course content. As you progress through the course, when you complete a particular step within a lesson, it'll automatically scroll on to the next section of the course. So if we jump into one that I've completed here, you'll see that this particular step really involves just watching a video. But then that will often be followed by an exercise in the next step, just to check in on people's understanding of the topic. So those are the courses themselves, and you'll see on the left-hand panel, I won't go through all of these tabs because you can explore those yourself, and you should also have been sent various sort of user guides to understand how to navigate and use the site. But we've also got webinars section, where all of the accompanying webinars, once you're logged in, you can, for example, this is the IMM Foundation course webinars page. If you click on the button register view recordings, you'll have a page where you'll be able to sign up for all of the 4 associated webinars for that course. Simply, once you're logged in, if you click on register, you'll be automatically sent further details and reminders by email, so just as you've had for this particular webinar, to log in via Zoom. So I wanted to just dive into that. For some people, there were some questions before today's webinar about, and confusion about, is the course just the webinars, or how it works. So I just wanted to run through that for some of you who haven't yet started the IMM training courses. But it combines the 2, and we've got 3 courses which I was mentioning there. The introduction, which this webinar is effectively the introduction webinar, which goes with the IMM e-learning course, and there's about 2 hours of online content to get through with the introduction. There's the foundation course, and that really starts to then build on that introduction. The introduction is basic because we really want people to have a common understanding of terminology and the key concepts that we're working through then subsequently within the remaining courses of foundation and builder. So the foundation really starts to go into a bit more depth, and involves 4 to 5 hours of online content to work through, and the option to join 4 weekly webinars. So you'll see that next week, next Friday, is the first foundation webinar. So, and you can do the e-learning materials either side of the webinar. I mean, what we're recommending is actually the particular modules that work up to that webinar are completed before the webinar in question. And as we launch the course, the foundation course, tomorrow to everybody on the site, you'll be sent details of which modules really to try to get through before each of the webinars in question. But as I say, that's not a rigid, you can go through some of this at your own pace. And that's really the benefit of e-learning. It can be done at your own pace. So there's four to 5 hours of online content, and there's 4 weeks of 90-minute webinar, group webinars. The Builder course really is building further on that and really diving much deeper into the topic and starting to look more practically at how do you actually develop the tools and processes and systems specifically within your own context. So there is a much more practical element of actually developing things like theory of change and indicator frameworks as you go through and progress that course. And thereby it's a longer course. It's another 20 hours in total of content, and there's 8 accompanying webinars. We do recommend that everybody tries to go through all 3. Of course we would. We think it's of great value to really have this capacity and understanding within an organization, and ideally even within a couple of people within the organization are really familiar with the topic. However, we also recognize that people have varying amounts of time, and hence that's why we've created this suite of courses that for different people's kind of requirements of both job and responsibilities that they have, you might want to focus on one or other of these actual courses. So they are standalone in their own right, but we really want everybody to go through the introduction and then either choose to complete just the foundation or go on to the Builder as well. So I'm just getting a question in. Can you go straight into the Builder? You can indeed go straight into the Builder. So for those who are more experienced in monitoring and evaluation, there is absolutely no reason why you can't just go straight in at Builder level. But as I say, you know, I think they are standalone in their own right, the courses, and you will benefit from going through them sequentially. So those are the three courses we have on offer. The brochure that you've hopefully all gotten with relation to the training, this is just an excerpt from it, and this gives you just a bit of an overview and also the timings of the different webinars. So today is the introduction webinar. On next Friday will be webinar 1 for the IMM Foundation, and then every week for the next 4 weeks we will be running that particular course. Will then be a week's gap before moving on to starting the Builder. The e-learning Builder course will be released and available on the 29th of May, which will give people opportunity to go and complete the IMM Foundation. This is new training material and course that we're releasing here. It's based on the last 7 years of delivering training. So the a lot of the content has been tried and tested over many years, but the formats have changed for us. So if you do run into issues as you run through a particular course, or you see something that's not quite right and you think it should be improved or strengthened in a particular way, we'd really appreciate you feeding that back to us, and there'll be an opportunity to feedback this information as we go. But please feel free at any point during your progress through the training to get in touch and let us know how it's going for you, and if there's any particular areas or challenges or improvements, we'd love to hear about those. So that information is available, and as I say, on the webinar sections on the website, all of those are already plugged in, and you can just go and register for any or all of them as of now. So just going to do a quick exercise now, and this is the kind of exercises that we will be doing you know, throughout these interactive webinars. And the question we're going to ask is just, what are your IMM monsters, your impact measurement and management monsters, the main issues or challenges that you have with your impact measurement. And to do this, we're going to use our virtual whiteboard, which you can see in front of us, which we can pop up various stickies. And I mentioned before that you all have a Q&A box. And I'd like you just to take a few minutes, and I'm going to literally just switch off for a few minutes and give everybody a chance to reflect on the question and drop in your answers into the Q&A box, just to get a sense of what are some of those cross-cutting, similar challenges that everybody's experiencing, so we can really connect with why are we doing this course, you know, what's the purpose behind it. So I'm just going to give 3 minutes, not a lot of time, just if you could reflect on that question and then start to drop in your answers into that Q&A box, and I'll bring some of those answers up onto the screen. Okay, I'll be with you in 3 minutes. Great, well, thank you everybody for all your responses. I'll just share my screen again. There's far too many for me to actually try and post up here, so which is great. Basically, in terms of all of this great content that you're pulling together, those points that I'm not able to post or run through, we will be collating all this and sending it out just at the end of the webinar. So apologies if I don't get everybody's points up here, but I'm just going to run through a flavor of them. So measuring financial or social value of the work. So this is the question we've come up with. What are the main challenges that everybody's experiencing to different degrees? So measuring financial or social value of the work. So that's indeed a challenge. And there's different methodologies, which some may have used in terms of social return on investment and looking at the real cost benefit of investment. That's certainly a challenge, but there's methodology available. Having consistent data collection points across projects and interventions. So having that systematized setup of data collection, subjective interpretations of scores when given a range, e.g. 1 to 10, lead to lack of validity. So yeah, the ability to really avoid bias is one of the big enemies that we're trying to overcome in our data collection, in terms of, you know, are some of the responses biased in different ways, positively or negatively? And a lot of that can be about interpretation. And how do we avoid misinterpretation of questions or how they're being responded to? Greater depth that proves the effectiveness of programs in a meaningful way, particularly regarding the quantitative narrative that is so important when bidding for additional funding. Yeah, people love numbers. I mean, we always say no numbers without stories, no stories without numbers, because people like different data, different bits of data. And you're right, funders often will like to be able to report. It's that sort of, you know, sense of being able to report things cumulatively and showing the whole picture, which you can tend to do with numbers and show a quantity. So measuring sustainability and linking it to the theory of change. Indeed, what is sustainability? Do we talk about sustainability from a financial perspective or from an impact and an outcomes perspective? How sustainable is the change that's being made? To have the right design and sampling approach. Key steps. We talk about often impact measurement and management being akin to an engine. And all the sort of moving parts need to be working together, or the car just doesn't go anywhere. And to have a good design and a good sampling is one of those key parts of the engine that if you get wrong, it really isn't going to go anywhere. So those are key elements. Implementing in a sustained and integrated way within a company, getting buy-in, people doing the forms simply to get it done rather than for real use. Again, is a bit about buy-in. You know, one of the things that we often experience is people have tools and systems. People aren't necessarily particularly well trained within organizations to actually use them and really understand why they're using them, how it's going to help them, what's the benefits, etc., etc. So that important people aspect of getting buy-in, it can sometimes be missed. Way too short a time window to be asking particular impact question, far better to ask much later on. So indeed, there's a whole issue around timing and, you know, and terminology. What does impact mean? So impact is really that longest term change that's happening. So how do we capture long-term change in short time frames? Well, it can't be done, but we can focus on other things. A lack of resources, assigning monetary value to some social and environmental impacts. So we had a social value piece over here as well. Not always having effective communication mechanisms in place to showcase impact. Absolutely, we may find that you go to all that effort of collecting that information, then it's not particularly well used or circulated, which is a great shame, of course. And monsters, measuring impact of preventing something from happening, i.e. prevention of diabetes, heart disease, or obesity. So as well as kind of delivering direct results, what are those indirect results that are actually happening in terms of, or not happening in this case? And lack of human resources, lack of support from management, coordinating between activities taking place in different countries and continents. So again, that's a similar sort of resource issue and buy-in from people into the process. So very common. There is a bunch of other comments up there, but just from a time perspective, we will write those all up for you. But I'm going to, that's really been great, just to ground us really on some of those challenges, both from a people perspective, a buy-in perspective, a technical tools, and the challenges of creating a system that works and is usable and is not going to have bias, are all the kind of issues and challenges that everybody faces in trying to use data to improve their organization and their programs. And that's really what our program of training is trying to address. So the various topics across these three impact measurement and management courses will hopefully tackle everything that you've just brought up there on those screens. There was certainly nothing there that didn't resonate with us, as with myself as a challenge, that we've not in some way tried to address through one of these training courses. So as you can see here, the topics really build up from one subject to another. So for example, here we've got what is a sample and what are the different types of sampling? What are the different types of data collection tools? So I won't read through all the topics, but that's the idea, is that many of those subjects will be covered. Certification out of the scheme, out of the training will also be a part. As you complete, you'll get a completion certificate. And also there is some other aspects to the certification as well. So we've been running this training now with another institute, the European Investment Bank, for the last kind of few months. And something that they found or requested was for us to provide some form of final assessment. So we've developed an assessment process that people can participate in at the end, really to just really check in on people's work. And this is really relating now to the Builder course, because that's where you produce things during the course of the training. So we'll be assessing those products of your work and their applicability to your own context. And there's also an option for having a course tutor. So we have 4 course tutors who are available, who will provide a 45-minute coaching and training session, which is structured across 8 weeks, across 10 weeks, 10 initiatives, 10 sessions throughout the Builder training program, which just is an opportunity to bounce around with an IMM expert, if you like, in terms of what you're trying to do. All this is available on the website if you want to have a look at that. And then finally thing to mention is once you do complete the Builder course, if you do go through the Builder, you'll be invited to join the alumni group, which is a group who we're going to provide some ongoing professional development to, and as a kind of committed group of kind of practitioners in this space. So there'll be regular ongoing monthly webinars for the alumni. Okay, so who can access the course? The course is open to staff and volunteers from your organization. So many of people on today's webinar are a part of a network and a group of organizations who've been had the opportunity opened up to them from their network provider, and you'll be able to invite other people from your organizations onto the training. And but we're just going to run through some of the potential people who might have an interest in joining. And really this is from the perspective of who do you really need to get buy-in from? So many of those kind of challenges that were flagged up there revolved around this idea of, you know, people being on board, people actually supporting efforts to collect data and monitor, evaluate. And so that really needs to start at the top. So we really recommend that senior management is on board and therefore is invited perhaps to participate in some of these training programs. I'm also conscious that we've got a whole span of size of organizations on today's call. Some who, you know, these roles will be all merged into one. There may be one person really driving this effort forwards, or you may be a much larger organization who does have these individual focuses and an own M&E manager, for example. So, you know, in your appreciation of this, it's really thinking about, you know, your own organization. Well, let's say there's a managing director or a board of trustees or a chairman or an operations manager. Their appreciation of the topic is important. You might look to invite them along to an introduction course. This introduction just continues, rolls on every month and is repeated. Operational staff may want to increase their knowledge on how to conduct effective IMM. So from the point of view of overseeing a particular project as a manager or as a volunteer, or indeed as an evaluation and learning manager themselves. And yeah, so you may have frontline staff as well who are actually working with people on the ground, maybe on more on a one-to-one basis, and the use of data really there is about the individual beneficiary and how they're helping that individual. So there are lots of people who might have a potential interest in joining the courses, and that we would encourage you to participate. So I'm just going to pause, and if there are any questions now relating specifically to this first segment, which is really about just grounding everybody in what the course is, what's available, and why we're doing it. So I'm just going to check on the Q&A box. If there are any questions, do feel free. If you've got any questions you want to stick your hand up, likewise, feel free to put your hand up, and I'll bring you in. We'll have a chat as we go. But there's no specific questions coming up there, so I'm going to crack on. Okay, so now I just wanted to go into, this Prezi can sometimes make you a little bit seasick. It was zooming in and out, so apologies for that. But we're going to have a recap now on introduction to the IMM, the actual training that this first course reflects. And to start with, we'll look at some key terminology. Again, we're using impact measurement and impact management. So let's define those terms. Impact measurement really is how to effectively measure the positive social and or environmental impact generated from a service or product. And that could be positive or negative. And this is generally through a process of monitoring and or evaluation. And then we have impact we have impact management, which is, I'm just arranging my panels, how to more effectively manage impact and unlock the potential of this measurement to increase positive impact. So there's a distinction in these terms. One is about measurement, and then one is about how to actually use that data, those measures, to actually manage a project, an organization more effectively, and which we see as being unlocking the potential of your measurement exercises. So I've got a few questions that have come in. Does the IMM suit any size of a project? So I would say yes, these principles are very much generic. As I was saying, there's the kind of how things vary in size of an organization is one, the expectation. You know, the expectation changes if an organization is small, voluntary, and has limited, therefore, time and resource to apply to this area. There's a lesser burden and expectation on the type of data and the scope and depth of data that you might be collecting. So it varies according to the size of a project, but also the size and resourcing of an organization. But the principles really remain the same. And I think, you know, that's a key thing to take away. How do you invite colleagues to access the training? Okay, so if you're an administrator on the training course, you'll be able to add sub-accounts to your account online. And the process of adding a sub-account, there is a guide on the website about how to add a sub-account. It's pretty simple, it's pretty straightforward. But if you've not done it, it's worth having a look at that guide. In 3 or 4 steps, you can invite people or send them a link to actually sign up to your account. And then they've got access, they'll have the same access. Now that does require you to have an administrator account, and that really depends upon the terms of your training arrangement within Focus. So, but if you are a part of a network, mostly you've all got 3 people from each organization who can attend. Okay, so I'm just answering a few questions as they come in. Now, why have we got our zombie there? Sometimes I don't know why we've got various sort of pop-up things on our, but this is all about, organizations stumbling often from pillar to post when it comes to measurement and not really applying this kind of transition from just measuring to actually using data really enlivens an organization in terms of their ability to start to structure how they're operating as an organization better. So that's a good save there for why we've got a zombie on the screen. Okay. So what are the main, I'm not going to do another whiteboard exercise here, but what I will just ask is for us to do a similar sort of or quick shout out. What are the main benefits of conducting IMM? We've talked about the challenges. So now if we're going to actually enroll people into participating, supporting, driving forwards, impact measurement and management, presumably everybody on today's call has, you know, is to a certain extent already bought in, kind of can see the value, but how do we sell that more widely? And that's really through these benefits, you know, why do it? So I just wanted to check in and see if we could come up with a similar sort of list. Again, just drop in the Q&A in terms of what are some of the benefits of impact measurement and management. And I'm going to take those on the fly as we go, because I don't want to spend too much time. So first benefit up there, improving effectiveness of what you are trying to do, better outcomes for beneficiaries in the program. Absolutely, the ultimate reason why we're doing this, better outcomes, better change, more sustainable change, learning. We talk about learning culture, learning organizations. People who just question things tend to do better work, you know, who are questioning as they go, who are sort of inquiring, is this working or not? And, you know, seeking out that learning. Cohesion. So if you've got data, much easier to collaborate, to bring people together and to make more cohesive programs. So absolutely. Motivation, absolutely. So seeing data, getting data back from about a program can be highly motivating to staff. If they're operating in the blindly, never really knowing whether they're actually making a difference or not, you know, it can, you know, suddenly having data and suddenly having information about what happened or what changed as a result of your can be very motivating. So that's a huge benefit to staff. Learning to improve your services. So again, that learning and improvement curve, which can really only come if you're being guided by some form of information. I've got that one already. So seeing if something works. So certainly new projects, new programs, we're not quite sure whether it's successful yet or not, and trying to improve it as we go. So seeing whether it works is certainly a benefit. Focusing minds on what we are trying to achieve. Absolutely. So some of the steps we'll run through, like theory of change. I often say that in the absence of any data, actually having been through the process of thinking about what your program's meant to be doing, how in theory it's meant to achieve, and getting everybody on the same page can be as powerful and as useful as actually having data in the end. And certainly in the absence of data is a very useful exercise. So it can really focus people's minds, increasing accountability to donors and stakeholders. So there's not just an internal thing going on here. This is about external accountability. We've got another accountability one here, particularly for donors. There's a quid pro quo. They give you money, you give them impact. Actual engagement numbers. So being able to really understand how many people, and you know, the numbers part of this, we're talking about impact a lot and change, but actually outputs. People struggle with collecting the basic numbers of people going through a program, because that can be challenging data to actually collect in itself. So actual engagement numbers, value for money and wider impact evidence. So as you collect more information and combine that with data about the inputs, what's going into a project, how much money, how much effort, how many hours of people's time, volunteer hours, you can really get a sense of, you know, that relationship between the inputs and what's being achieved. And that's called value for money and value for money type analysis. I'm going to only take a couple more because we've got them pouring in, which is brilliant. But just so that we can stay on track, we've got empowerment of project actors. So a bit like this one over here about motivation, you know, empowering people and you know, data in the right hands and people kind of taking that information and poring over it and looking at it, making decisions around it can be very empowering as well as motivating. Qualitative information might reveal hidden unexpected benefits and additional opportunities. Brilliant. Well, I'm going to take that as our last one and we're going to jump back into our presentation now. But I hope we've got a sense there of the numerous benefits, and we're going to use those benefits to convince others, because not everybody might be bought into the benefits, and that's part of the process of really onboarding people into your IMM efforts going forwards. And just to sum up, you know, we summarize what everybody's just talked about on that previous whiteboard exercises in 5 points. general learning to improve services or products to increase impact, improving reporting back to funders, helping to build further relationships, i.e. satisfy that quid pro quo of exchange of finances for a return on social return, give a competitive edge in raising funds and investments. We'll talk about how to use your M&E to improve fundraising as an integral part of the training that we do. And it's certain that if you've got the capabilities and capacities to do this area of work well, you're, it'll help you stand out in a very competitive field for raising funds, because effectively that's, funders who, you're making it easier for funders to work with you if you're able to do this, because they've got somebody to report to too. Driving collaboration with other organizations through sharing and data and learning. And then finally, providing data to support marketing and communication efforts. So again, another key use of impact measurement and management data. So that's just a sum up of the key benefits that we like to talk about within InFocus. So what's required for impact measurement and management? Well, certainly it's people who are well trained and motivated. That's a real prerequisite. But we've also got high quality tools and processes that need to be in place. And it's really the combination of these three elements that's important. And often we'll work with organizations who maybe have one or two really well covered of these bases. And often it's the people side, the training side, that is often missing in terms of people's understanding of how to go about collecting good data, having trained their data collectors, for example, and people really understanding what their roles and responsibilities are within the arena of data collection or analysis or storage or manage of data. There's lots of different moving parts, which really people should be well trained in to be able to do well. And it's in our experience, it's one of the areas that that isn't catered for so well, and hence why we've kind of focused on some of this training. So those are really the kind of where we're working towards trying to support you in getting to with your own organizations and projects, recognizing that everybody is at a different stage in the development of their own monitoring and evaluation or impact measurement and management systems. So the key is to build from where you are. We don't suggest tearing anything up. We suggest you just plugging the gaps and building on what you're already doing, no doubt, to a certain extent quite well. So who to involve? There's two sort of kind of main cohorts of people that we've covered off here. It's internal and external. So people who are at a strategic, people who are doing the longer term thinking, that should be the people usually at the board or managing director level. So they're important to get on board. And this kind of initiative is often best driven from that place as well, because if you are in that role and position, you can really see the value of having this information from the point of view of managing your, what keeps a managing director up at night is often fundraising. It's bringing in the next pound or dollar to keep the organization going. And it's really clear that this can certainly support on that area, but also, achieve your long-term mission, really. Management teams, again, we ran through some of these a little bit earlier in terms of who to invite onto this training. It's the same sort of people internally, as well as operational teams who are frontline, who have their responsibilities in this process. Now, people have different responsibilities in the process, but understanding in a common way why you're doing this and what are the processes and tools and how they all fit together is a good grounding for everybody really to have within an organization. But then we've got external people who can also be involved in your impact measurement and management. So that may be academic, perspective people. So for example, a researcher within or a master's student within a university context and setting, they're often may have some intersection with your area of work. They may have an interest, they may be doing their masters on that topic. Now, we've actually produced a guide on how to work with academia in this sense. If you're a kind of non-profit, charitable organization, just to ensure that there is a cohesive objective across, there can sometimes be different aims and objectives out of these kind of relationships. So there is a guide there to help with that, but they can certainly add capacity to your team, whether that's data collection or analysis or doing some secondary data work, as well as consultants. So, this particular area of expertise, which you don't have internally that can accelerate the process, that's really where to draw on perhaps, consultants or external experts who can help accelerate the process for you or support you with your capacity and thinking around things. So there are a range of people to get involved in impact measurement and management. And finally, I'm just going to recap what are the overall processes and tools to run through. So we frame this really around a learning cycle, which shows how learning from impact measurement is used across a continuous process to make improvements to services or products. So the first kind of stage in the learning cycle is to define and map out how a service or product, and we talk about both because some organizations will actually have developed a product, might be an app or that may help with service provision in some way, or you may be a service provider. It's the same process really in terms of really thinking about how that service or product will lead to social change. So once you've got that well defined, there's how to measure it, choosing methods, developing tools, collecting data, followed by learning and communicating. So taking that information, generating and sharing learning from the data that's being collected, and then moving on to improvement, using learning to improve services and products, and really seeing that as a virtual cycle. It doesn't end really. As soon as you've improved something, you're going to continue to refine your understanding of how change is happening and then continue with your measurement cycles. And so within the context of that, we're going to just give an example here from an organization in Kenya called MISA. Some of you may have heard of them who are involved in sport for development. They use sport as a way of engaging with disadvantaged groups from slums in Nairobi and Kenya, and introduce different lifestyle and life skills programs, HIV education. So the first two steps really that we work through will be, first of all, called something like developing a theory of change. Some of you may be familiar with that term. This is just an example of what a theory of change ends up looking like from a visual perspective. We often boil these down to a chain of outcomes so that really show how change is intended to happen from the long-term end of the spectrum. And let me just see if I can find my annotation tools here so that I can actually, on the right hand side, the circular yellow is really kind of an impact statement, and then backtracking from there are a set of outcomes that are kind of almost preconditions to getting to that impact. This is a visual representation, not just of outcomes, but also of activities that lead to those outcomes and the main assumptions sitting underneath the organization's work, which are the beliefs about how change really happens. So that development of a theory of change is a great exercise to bring people's thinking together about what they're doing and why, and really becomes the blueprint for both monitoring and evaluating the program, as well as being a tool in its own right to communicate to others as to what your program is really trying to achieve. And so there are other tools like logic models that do a similar job, or just a very well structured strategic plan around your activities. A program strategy document may actually capture many of the similar sorts of information. But this just lays it out in a way that it makes it very amenable to developing your monitoring and evaluation processes subsequently. So we like theory of change as a tool. Subsequently defining indicators, bits of information. So this is MISA's indicator framework, which then takes different areas within that theory of change and comes up with little bits of information that would tell us something about that area of the theory of change, whether that's an outcome, you know, what could we find? Piece of information that tells us that somebody is more knowledgeable about HIV and AIDS, and more knowledgeable about the prevention strategies that they might adopt, for example. So then when we move on to measurement, we've got our blueprint, we know what to measure, we want to select data collection methods as well as software that's going to allow us to collect and store and manage that information. Once we've selected methods, there's an element of organizing, of developing those. There's a stage of developing those data collection tools. Then choosing a sample, and a sample really is just, we'll often struggle to measure or collect data from everybody who's involved in our projects. We don't have the capacity or time to do so. So what we need to do is choose a sample from them. And the purpose of a sample is just to really kind of try to replicate what the results would look like if we had sampled the whole population. So it needs to be a representative sample. So how you go about creating a representative sample so that you can in some way draw conclusions about the wider population from the information that you collect is a key step to get right. And then deploying data collection tools is really a key part then of measuring, of getting your measurement data together. So again, just the example here that we're using from MISA, we've got a bunch of data collection tool methodologies here and tools that are on display. The top three are often the mainstay of outcome measurement within the sector in terms of questionnaires, focus groups, as well as interviews. And then we've got more, and community mapping as well, which is more of a qualitative. And we'll talk about the different types and buckets of methodologies from quantitative to qualitative type data. And then we've got registration and attendance forms, which are more focused around that output type data and information, which is an important aspect as well. Although we recognise that most people struggle more so with the outcome data collection and making sure that that's robust and useful. MISA use SurveyMonkey and they use Excel, and we tend to really trying to recommend that people keep their technology simple, particularly when they're starting out. But there are a lot of more sophisticated softwares and tools that can be used as part of this process, either as an all-encompassing piece of software that covers all aspects, or again, just taking a piece of software that can help with one element of your impact measurement and management systems. And then finally, we've got a little here about training. In terms of, so I'm just checking in on a few of the questions. Why do you think that outcome data is harder to collect? Well, I think it's not necessarily harder to collect. I think people, often aren't sure of which is the most appropriate method to go about collecting outcome data. They may not have done it before, may not have focused on that area. But I don't think per se it's more difficult. I think it's just less well done, let's say, in terms of across the board in our experience. I'm going to answer some of those questions as we go. Can we see? Oh yeah, sorry, I've already answered that question. That's fine. Okay, so third stage in the process, learn and communicate. Generate and share learning from the data collected. So analyzing data and generating learning is a key step, and using learning to drive fundraising, investment, and communication. And there's lots of different ways to use the learning, you know, to communicate your learning, if you like. One of the mainstays is a report. So here we've got an impact report, and certainly this will be one of the key tools that we run through within the training, is how to put together a really powerful, well-structured, credible impact report once you've gone to all that effort of collecting information. And that may be for a funder, it may be for your own board, it may be for your own internal learning purposes, lots of different reasons to do it. But that's certainly one of many different ways that you might present and communicate your impact data. Using learning to improve performance. So ultimately, that's, you know, we're really into the management, impact management side of things. And improving performance, it might be, you might think in terms of strategic performance, the long-term performance, the long-term goals, and that data might find its way. We've got a calendar here again from MISA, which is focusing on some annual internal meetings or biannual meetings, which might have a longer term focus, but you could also be using information within weekly or bi-weekly more operational frontline meetings. The nature of the data might change in those meetings, but the key here is using the data to actually think about what direction you're taking, whether with some of those shorter term operational decisions or longer term programmatic or organizational wide decisions about what to do. So really, that's really stepping into this impact management side of the equation, which is one of the key ways to then improve the performance of a project, program, or an organization overall. And as I say, that's a virtual cycle that we have going on. So that really is a kind of quick run through. And I know that might be a recap for some of you already been through the IMM introduction course, but others may not have been through that as yet. So there is, I think you should already have had the brochure downloaded or sent to you, which has all the dates for all the training that's coming up and all the topics. If you've got any questions on any of what I've just been through in today's introduction, either on the side of the training itself and how that works and how that operates, or the material that I've been through, please do feel free to reach out. And I'm now going to stick around and just see if there are any additional questions that people have. We are 3:10, and you'll all be very pleased that we've not gone for 90 minutes today. I'll stick my video back on just to wrap up today's introductory webinar. But I just wanted to give an opportunity now for the last 10-15 minutes. If there are any questions, I'd love you to either stick your hand up, because if you're burning to ask somebody, it's probably a question that somebody else has got as well. That would be useful to answer. But if not, I'm just going to check in and see if we've got any questions coming in. Okay, we've got one question here. With the lack of human resources within internal staff, which roles do you seem are most interchangeable, or one person can wear several hats? Okay, yeah. So this is, this is often the biggest challenge is getting enough capacity, enough time and attention from the right people to do this work. So often we see monitoring and evaluation, whoever you've got in your team, if it's this kind of team of 5 or a team of 2 or a team of 10, you know, that everybody has a role to play of some sort. And so it's often good to be able to center the monitoring and activity with one person with an overall responsibility and duty. And to a certain extent, that might be somebody who is either most in the know or most knowledgeable about the subject, or is, you know, has it in their job description, for example, from the outset, or is kind of inclined towards monitoring and evaluation. You might want to have somebody who's taking overall coordination, and we often recommend that, well, that could sit at any place. In a small organization, it doesn't really matter where that sits. The larger and more structured an organization becomes, then that sort of monitoring and evaluation coordinator role needs to be more, more structured and more, the positioning of it within the organization and who it relates to, that position, needs to be thought through a little bit better. But in a small organization, I think it's important to see that everybody's got some role to play. And as we looked at those 4 stages and the 10 steps in the overall process, people will be part of those steps at different stages, and they'll have a different role to play. So they'll be interchanged in and out at different stages. For example, during theory of change, you might want everybody to be involved at that stage, but particularly, those people who are more strategically, thinking about the overall direction, they might be very much involved at that stage. So who to involve is really a question about your own organization and size. So I hope that's answered that question a little bit. Can you please explain the learning cycle in a much easier way? Okay, I'll have a go. We want to look at the learning cycle. I mean, this is a way of driving change and organizing. We often, I mentioned before, talking about a car, an analogy of a moving car with monitoring and evaluation, or impact measurement and management. And by the way, we're using those terms really interchangeably. Within this sector, monitoring and evaluation, impact measurement and management are used very interchangeably in different parts of the world, in fact, but the meaning more or less the same thing. How do we use information to drive improvements within an organization? So this learning cycle, and you'll find learning cycles, exist within every industry. And it's really about defining what it is you want to measure and what the results of your organization are going to be. Then coming up with a way of measuring them. Then once they are measured, how do you use that information, first of all, to communicate and learn and communicate from the data, and then to improve? And why we've got a virtual kind of cycle there is to recognize that process doesn't stop. So this is really a process. And within this process, there are a number of things that need to be taken care of, which are really reflected in the individual steps that you'll see beside each of these boxes. So we're going to go into that much more depth in the next foundation course and through the builder course. So some of this will kind of, dawn or kind of break through, and you'll get a sort of a deeper understanding of these topics at different stages as you progress through the course, I hope. Yeah, so they've got a question here about its applicability to bigger organizations rather than one single project, of which I'm a project management for. Are there other similar people to my perspective? So I'm absolutely sure there are. Some people will, as I said at the beginning of this, some people will be from large organizations, but we've certainly got, I know for a fact, many organizations on today's call that are very small organizations. But the principles here are the same. So that's the thing to take away here, is that understanding, if you're trying to bring about some form of social change through your projects and programs, understanding what that change is, coming up with some measures. Now the scope of those measures might change. If you're a small project, you might just look at collecting one or two things. Whereas you're a larger organization with a greater burden of evidence required about your, the project that you're running, you might collect a greater scope of information. And we talk about triangulating data as we go through the training as well, bringing different types of data that will help support the findings that you've got. So one data collection methodology might be complemented with another that gives a slightly different understanding of the information and data that's being collected. But the process here, and the steps are really kind of common, whether you're a small organization or a large organization. And so we're very familiar with working with, much smaller organizations, which you do need to kind of, account for in your approach. Okay, so I think that's all the questions that have come in currently. I'm conscious that of everybody's time. Just to wrap up with what's coming next week. So tomorrow I mentioned that the impact measurement and the IMM foundation course will be launched. So we will let you know by email as and when that comes online, but that should be tomorrow, and you'll be able to log in and start making your way through that course. Similarly, the first Impact IMM Foundation webinar will take place next Friday. So we'll kick off that first webinar. All of these are recorded. So if you can't make the webinar live, there will be an edited down version of the webinar with all the sort of dead bits and, sound, where we've kind of, gone off piste. It'll be cut out, and you'll have an edited version to run through. So you can click on the access the recording button on the webinar page to see the recordings. But the first one will be next week. We've also got some learning community webinars next week as well, which are a separate topic for some of you who are on today's training. But I'm not going to confuse those with our impact measurement and management training, which we're really focusing on in this webinar. So that is everything for today. I hope that was a useful introduction. I will be around for a few more, another 5–10 minutes. So I'm going to stick around. If you've got more questions, please feel free. But otherwise, thank you everybody for your attention and for participating. And I will no doubt see you again all very soon. Thank you very much.